In the case of nuclear or radiological fallout, people living around potential targets such as military bases and chemical plants may be advised to evacuate.
Hello, Sublation media viewers. It's I, Douglas Lain. I am just now realizing that I didn't put the stream up on the Patreon yet, so I'm going to do that right now while we're talking. But we are back. I'm the author of Noam Chomsky and the Time Box, head honcho here at Sublation Media. With me, as always on Mondays, is Benjamin Studebaker. Ben, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself while I correct my mistake?
Yep, it's me, Benjamin Studebaker, the author of two books, The Chronic Crisis of American Democracy, The Way is Shut, and Legitimacy in Liberal Democracies.
So we're going to talk about the war again. It seems like it's the kind of thing now that it will be dominating our minds and our conversations for, I would say, weeks to come. But how are you feeling about it? What are you thinking about as this war drags on, as this attack on Iran drags on?
The last time we talked about it, we were on the Monday after the weekend where it got going. So the oil markets had just opened and they were already up, I think, 5%. Since that time, the oil price has risen considerably to around $100.
Yeah,
it's still lower than it was during the peak of the Ukraine war in 2022, but that could change.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still lower than the common price during the early part of the Obama administration, around the Arab Spring, 2011, 2012. Still lower than then, but definitely elevated enough that it will be noticed. And if it sticks around at this level for any great length of time, it will have economic effects, significant economic effects.
Yeah,
that's the first thing I've noticed.
I've been kind of looking at the reaction to the war from what I would call the right, although it's not like the far right or anything, but like the All In podcast. I watched that. I've been looking at financial podcasts and things like that. And the thought is that even though the market hasn't really had a terrible reaction, I guess the Dow is kind of flattish or up and down, but the concern is that perhaps the market is underreacting to the situation. And with the oil prices going up, you're right. There's a potential that there's going to be some economic consequences both in the market and then at the pumps and maybe even down the road when it comes to food prices. And we won't feel it first. It will be in Europe and even China.
Well, we do feel it at the pump. The gas prices at the pump are already up about $1 a gallon out here in Indiana. It's noticeable already at that level.
Okay. Right. Yeah. But we won't feel the full extent of the problem as quickly as some other places that are more reliant on oil and resources going through that strait.
Yes.
So and I saw that
parts of the world that are most affected will be in Asia. India, China, Japan. Those are the really heavy producer countries that get large percentages of their oil currently through the strait. Now, India has been invited by the administration to buy oil from the Russians to try to offset this. Previously, the administration was trying to get India to stop buying oil from the Russians. Now the attitude is that India can go ahead. It's no big deal.
Right.
So there will be some of that. There will be a bit of that. There will also be some use of some of the Saudi infrastructure. There are some Saudi pipelines that can take some of the oil that otherwise would have gone through the strait. But the thing that is really going to, I think, be the big driver is whether Venezuela and Nigeria can produce at a level that will help to offset this for the Europeans. Whether the liquefied natural gas in the United States is able to delay or offset the impact on Americans such that this is not felt for a very long time at a very extreme level. But as time has gone on here, my impression is that it's going to be felt on a level that will be politically significant, and that it will be difficult to unwind that effect within the unit of time that Trump will be looking for.
Well, if the strait gets opened up in the next week or so, where that's not necessarily going to happen. And right now
I think that's happening.
Well, the French have said they're going to come in and help secure the strait, and
the French have nothing that they can use to do that. The French are not capable of securing the strait. The French have tried to get the Iranians to reopen it, but I don't see the French being able to make an intervention in the Persian Gulf with their one aircraft carrier that is going to flip this situation. What I am also seeing is the new Ayatollah who was just picked. I think we should talk about this. This new Ayatollah is someone who Trump personally says is not an acceptable pick for him. Israel has said that no new Ayatollah is an acceptable pick, that whoever is picked, Israel will target not just the person who was picked, but anyone involved in the picking. And then I think the choice of the son is going to be difficult to legitimate within Iran, because the son, from an Islamic point of view, is not a very advanced Islamic scholar. He doesn't have the pedigree from the theological point of view of someone who can be supreme leader. The dynastic tie is a more monarchical kind of legitimation, which the Islamic Republic, qua being an Islamic Republic and having overthrown a monarchist regime, is explicitly in conflict with. And we know from some of the reports that came out about the process of picking the new supreme leader that there were major divisions within Iran about the process. And a lot of this will now be swept under the rug, and we'll be encouraged to think that very quickly the Iranian regime picked a new supreme leader and picked another Khamenei, thereby showing that it remains committed to opposing the United States. But it's worth bearing in mind that the reports over the course of the last week indicated first that there was an online meeting of the Assembly of Experts because they were not confident that they could meet in person safely. At this online meeting, the Guard pushed very hard for them to quickly pick the son of Khamenei, that many of the Islamic scholars were not comfortable with this. A vote was taken at that meeting, but that vote was disputed by members of the Assembly of Experts. They felt that the vote was held under pressure and that more deliberative time and space were needed. The Guard felt that a very quick decision needed to be made to demonstrate continued resolve against the United States. And so then there was another vote that was to be taken. There was talk about perhaps indefinitely having the president perform the role and transferring more power over to the president. Then the president made the move to apologize to the Gulf states for striking them. And after the president made that move, that seemed to push the scholars to side with the Guard, that they should quickly pick someone now so as to prevent the president from taking moves that they don't agree with. And for that reason, they seem to have quickly jumped on, okay, fine, Khamenei, just to prevent the president from misrepresenting the foreign policy from their point of view. I don't think that the new Khamenei will stick. I think that the new Khamenei will first be a target of the United States and Israel. And second, even insofar as that's not the case, I think he's going to really struggle to maintain over a long period of time the support of these different factions because of the amount of disagreement that we already saw prior to his being picked that leaked out to the press and became public knowledge. So who knows what else happened that didn't leak out to the press or become public knowledge. And then also, I think the dynastic choice. Going with a dynastic choice makes it clear that this regime is not altogether very different from having a series of shots. It's not altogether different at that stage. And I think that in a medium to long term, suppose that this military operation did wrap up within a few weeks and this Khamenei was still in charge, I think he would struggle over a period of, say, 5 years to sustain after this is over, given that his claim is just a dynastic tie. He doesn't have any kind of theocratic theological expertise that would substantiate it.
Just thinking in the short term, if you're somebody who wants this to end, it is not good that the new Ayatollah is in such a weak position. Whatever decisions need to be made in order to conclude this conflict will have to be made by someone who has enough authority, at least within the Islamic Republic, with at least amongst the mullahs, to make the decisions stick. And if he isn't that person, then this is a bad news for those of us who want to see this end. And I can see why Trump might not be happy with this choice, even apart from his supposedly hardline positions or his belligerence or what have you. It seems to me the real risk right now is like there's a contradiction at work here. On the one hand, they want to destroy the military and the infrastructure of Iran. They want to destroy the leadership. But on the other hand, they want to secure that strait. They want to secure the borders. They want to enforce order. And if the regime completely falls apart, that will become nearly impossible to do.
Yeah. One question is whether there's disagreement about this within the alliance framework. So one of the things that recently happened is that Israel struck this oil depot near Tehran, causing a gigantic towering inferno, and then oil rain, acidic oil rain, falling all over Iran, with streets and sewer systems catching fire, and horrible. Looks terrible, nasty, bad air quality, all the rest of it. Acid in the pipes, real disaster. Lindsey Graham has said that this is something that the United States doesn't support because it is likely to promote Iranians sticking with the regime, and that Israel should not be targeting the oil infrastructure that the country needs to be able to develop after the regime change takes place. That's Lindsey Graham saying that. Now, it might be the case that sometimes the United States will blame an ally for something it supports, or at least, tacitly, or refuse to stop. And so sometimes an ally will be used as a meat shield for criticism for something the United States, really and actually would be okay with. But it's significant that Lindsey Graham feels a need to at least attempt to distance the United States from that move. And then also MERS, who has backed the United States in doing the regime change, responded to that event. MERS is the Chancellor of Germany, by saying that we don't want to destabilize the country to the point at which there's a civil conflict or something like a Libya situation. So there is a certain amount of wrangling within the alliance structure about just how much instability is the right amount and what strikes contribute to creating the amount of instability that they want versus risk a level of instability that would go beyond what they want. And do some states have different interests with regard to that? For instance, maybe Israel has a greater interest in instability than the European allies. Or maybe that's just talk that people are using to create an appearance of disagreement. I don't know.
Well, I've heard that there are two wars on Iran right now. There's the Israeli war and the U.S. war. That's one narrative that's out there. And it doesn't seem impossible to me that they would have different objectives, and those objectives could be in conflict. I do wonder about what the Israeli objectives might be in terms of creating disorder in Iran, because it would seem to me that they too would want to be able to negotiate some sort of secure arrangement with a central authority rather than see the country break apart. And I mean, Gaza and Hamas is a case in point. They tolerated Hamas for a long, long time, preferring them to the kind of uncertainty and instability that would arise from them being deposed or taken out, preferring them even to the PA, I think. So I don't know what the Israeli aim actually is there. I think I understand the U.S. aim, but I don't.
It may be that there's the same aim, but there are different beliefs about how much instability is required. So it could also be a difference in terms of attitude to tactics that is being discussed as if it were a difference in goals, but is actually tactics. We don't know. I think it's also possible that Israel may be concerned that if Iran becomes too manageable, that this might break up some of the coalition building that Israel has done with neighboring Arab states, many of whom have drawn closer to Israel in part because of Iran. So Israel, on the one hand, wants to stop Iran from arming the various groups that Israel is in conflict with. But at the same time, the fact that many of the Arab states quite dislike Iran has been of some use to Israel diplomatically in constructing friendlier relations with its immediate neighboring states, with Egypt, with Jordan, Saudi Arabia.
The bees needs too asks, what's so special about Iran? Sorry if that's a dumb question. So what is so special about Iran, do you think?
What's special about Iran? So there are really three states in the Middle East that are typically considered players that could try to, over time, acquire a large amount of territory in the Middle East and construct a large state. A large Middle Eastern state could potentially control a lot of oil and use its control of oil to try to blackmail or influence what takes place outside of the Middle East. Such a state could, over time, use economic leverage to develop into a real player in the region. There are three countries that have the technical capability, in principle, to build a state like that: Turkey, Egypt, and Iran. They're large enough in terms of population, they're large enough in terms of military to potentially pose some threat to dominate the region. All of the smaller states that have lower populations are scared of these big states and worried about their expansion. And for this reason, all of the small states with lower populations draw close to the West, because the West doesn't want a large state to form in the Middle East that can be a real player. And these small states want to retain their independence and want to retain their ability to get rich on a more individual basis. So they make deals with the Western states, make security arrangements with the Western states that preserve this collection of small and medium-sized states that sit in between Egypt, Turkey, and Iran, these buffer states. And so these buffer states have for a long time been concerned about Iran's activity, because since the Iranian Revolution, Iran has looked at various points to intervene in the politics of these states. Iran has tried to establish friendly governments in places like Syria and Lebanon and Yemen. Iran has ties to groups inside Iraq. Saudi Arabia regards Iran as posing a significant long-term threat to it, because Saudi Arabia is a much smaller country in terms of population. So all of these states are always trying to get the Western states to help them deal with Iran. They want to see Iran contained, weakened, but they don't want spiraling instability, which threatens their own ability to enjoy economic growth and to have peace and stability. So states like Kuwait and Qatar and the UAE, Bahrain, these states are all concerned about Iran, but they also don't want to see disruption to shipping in the Persian Gulf that can result in their loss of oil revenue or their loss of tourism. So these states, while they have concerns about Iran, they also don't want to see Iran destroyed in a way which is heavily destabilizing. They don't want to see regime change done in Iran in an extremely disruptive way. So many of these states are caught in a difficult position vis-a-vis Iran. They believe in principle that the Iranian regime should go, but they're quite concerned about the immediate strategies and tactics that are being used, because they're in close proximity and they rely on infrastructure and they rely on shipping routes that are disrupted or could be disrupted by the conflict.
So I just want to point out that of the three states you mentioned, two of them are aligned. I mean, not more than aligned with the West. I mean, Turkey's a member of NATO. Egypt has been an ally of the United States since 1980, 79, something like that. And so
Carter is feted by people for having flipped Egypt. Carter, the Egypt-Israel peace deal is the flipping of Egypt from a state that previously posed a threat in the region from the point of view of not just the West, but also the small states in the Middle East, a state that tried to establish a united Arab republic that would have included Syria and Lebanon and tried to include Israel and Jordan and Libya at one point. previously had serious and significant designs on expansion within the region. That state accepted that it was not going to be able to expand and cut an economic deal with the West, which involved making peace with Israel.
And that's essentially, I think, what Trump in his way is trying to do now with Iran, or was trying to do with Iran, and failed to do. Would you say that's essentially right?
Well, we don't know yet what the ultimate outcome of this will be. I think that there will probably be more of this now, especially now that they have picked the son of Khomeini to be Ayatollah. I think that we will see a continued effort to go after and target this new Ayatollah. Because at this point, if they permit this person to be supreme leader, after having said that if a new supreme leader was chosen that they did not like, they would target that person, it would be diminishing to their credibility if they didn't subsequently target him.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that this will continue for some time yet as they make an attempt to try to get the new Ayatollah.
Right. Okay. But what I'm saying, though, is that the aim, both diplomatically and now militarily, is to basically get Iran to accept that they are not going to expand. They will have to make some sort of economic deal in order to continue to exist. That's basically what they're being told. It's an offer they can't refuse, is what they're being offered. Whether or not they can or not is really up in the air, but that's the logic of it.
They're trying to refuse it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and this is a result of that. So now, what is it, do you think, that makes Iran so reluctant to take the deal? Is it mostly religious, ideological, or are there other factors that give them the impression that they don't have to take that deal? Is it because of their support from China and Russia that they feel they have other options, or is it really just the ideological commitment to Islamism? That
I think ideological commitment is certainly part of the story. I think that there's a fact of the matter, which is that the regime has not collapsed. Whatever level of instability and protest and uprising that has taken place in Iran, it's not been sufficient to cause the state to be unable to function. The Iranian state seems to have distributed power within itself to a significant degree, to the point at which it's difficult to simply kill off its leadership straightforwardly. There are lots of different places within the Iranian state that new leaders can potentially come from to fill gaps that are opened up. There's also the Guard, kind of Praetorian element to the regime, where the Guard remains quite strongly committed to the regime. It's not necessarily committed to the theological element to the same degree as perhaps the guys on the Assembly of Experts, the Council of Experts, would be. But it is committed to sustaining this regime in something like its present form. And Iran, that was buddied up with the United States, would probably not have the same level of military involvement in the region. It would probably not have the Guard. The members of the Guard might get amnesty. They might not be punished. Donald Trump has offered members of the Guard amnesty, but they also might not be in the current positions that they're occupying with this level of power and influence and prestige. That's something that might change. So I think the Guard has continued so far to support the regime. The Guard hasn't defected to the protesters, and the Guard has not yet split internally within itself. And so what has tended to happen as a result of pressure being put on the Iranian regime, instead of the regime collapsing, it's been that the regime has become more and more oriented around the Guard. And the concrete evidence of this in the last week is that the Guard got what it wanted. It got a quick appointment of the son of Khomeini, even though he doesn't have the relevant theocratic background, to Ayatollah. Now, as you make the regime more and more organized around its military, it's going to be harder to make the case that the regime is ideologically meaningfully distinctive. And that's where I think the real trouble here comes. It's not just that there are people in Iran who would like to see it liberalized or made democratic or friendlier with the West. It's also that there's a set of people who have sincere religious convictions who find the regime to be hypocritical or to be not really substantively committed to the religion in perhaps the way that it used to be under the first Ayatollah, and then certainly, even under the second Ayatollah now, because we've got a third Ayatollah who's even less qualified from a theological point of view to hold that office than Khomeini was relative to Khomeini. And even with Khomeini, there was a reduction in the level of theological sophistication relative to Khomeini. So there's been, at the level of Islam, a slide away from real serious commitment to the religion. And that, I think, is also going to be a significant source of legitimation problems.
Okay. So someone asks, regimes can exist in internal contradictions quite easily. So who cares if he's not technically an Ayatollah? Can I give a shot at answering that? And then you can give an answer as well. My answer would just be, I talked to an expat, a guy named Mani, over the weekend, and he described life in Iran as he understood it from talking to his relatives and also from his lived experience before 2003. And what he said, or 2003, 2004. And what he said was that, living under a theocracy is incredibly grueling and oppressive, and that the Sharia law was enforced in draconian ways, and that the people of Iran felt it and resisted it. That there was quite a lot of underground activity just to be able to, let's say, form a band or put on an art show or write a novel. These are the things he talked to me about because he was a member of my writing workshop. So this mattered to him. Required that you hide from the police and that you put your life at risk for those kinds of things. So I would say that when you have a population living under strict religious law where their life is impacted by that, for their leadership to be seen as compromised in theological terms, it may make them more vulnerable to future protests. And also the protests that they saw, those were put down. The leadership of the protests were killed, and I don't think that there's much chance of anything substantial being organized in the aftermath of that. But they were unique historically. It was unprecedented, is what I've been told, and that it was a surprise. And that also showed some weakness of the regime. So I do think that legitimacy is a problem for the regime, even as the bombs drop and as they kind of use that to shore up their support.
Contradictions can be functional. Sometimes contradictions can contribute to the legitimacy of a regime. I have myself written about regimes in which legitimacy becomes compatible with an enormous amount of internal contradiction. The difficulty is, in Iran, it's not the case that the Iranian regime is associated with very good results in either military or economic terms. So Iran is not growing economically at a very rapid rate under this regime. And that can be blamed on the United States and the sanctions policy, but nevertheless, it is the case that it's not economically growing rapidly. Militarily, the Iranian regime has recently suffered considerable defeats in Lebanon and in Syria. So there is also a sense that if you're looking to the military to make a claim to legitimacy on the basis of its own competence, that's a difficult argument to make right now, given what has recently happened. And I think what happened in Syria and Lebanon significantly contributed to these protests breaking out at this time. There's a sense that the military isn't even good at what it is supposed to be doing.
Right.
So when you have a case where the state doesn't have any kind of claim that it can make comparatively, you look at, say, rich liberal democracy. Rich liberal democracies can still say, sure, it all looks disgusting. It all looks terrible. But where in the world is there a richer country? Where in the world is there a more militarily powerful country? Is there some other system that's compatible with this level of wealth and military power? If you say that there is, you can't prove it because you can't point to it. In the case of the Iranian regime, these contradictions also come alongside seemingly bad results in comparison to other states of similar size and with similar amounts of natural resources. The standard of living in Turkey is significantly higher than in Iran at this point. The standard of living in Poland is significantly higher than in Iran at this point.
Mhm.
So there are comparisons that citizens can make. And in Iran, there's no blackout of media. It's not as if Iranians don't see what the standard of living looks like in other places.
Well, there is now, but there wasn't for a long time.
Yeah, at this point, the internet has been disrupted, but there's no long-term history of that, as there is in, say, North Korea. Right? In North Korea, the population has no idea what else is going on, and hasn't had any idea for decades at a time, really.
Yeah,
but in the case of Iran, people know, people are aware.
That's something I learned from talking to Mani about this, is that there's a large cohort of educated, modernized, kind of internationally savvy Iranians in Iran. That you're talking about a country that had a developing middle class, had an educated middle class, and which was outward looking, and it's still outward looking to an extent.
You can make an argument that all of this has been brought about by the response of the Western powers to Iran. That the Iran-Iraq War, the arming of Iraq during the Iran-Iraq War to bleed and weaken Iran, the various military operations that have been staged over the years, that these things have a role to play. And all of that is true. Nevertheless, if you're looking at what is your day-to-day standard of living, quality of life, level of security, no matter who you're blaming for it, it is the case that this form of regime doesn't seem to get the best possible results.
Yeah, I
and
mean,
for a while, you can say, well, at least
Mm-hmm.
it's theocratically aligned with your religion. You could make that argument, but it's going to get harder to make that argument when they've made an Ayatollah choice on the basis of dynastic ties. That's not how you pick the leader of a religion. You don't pick the leader of religion based on dynastic ties like he's a king. That's not going to work.
Yeah, I'm going to throw this comment up on the screen here from Theory Underground. It says, is there any left sect in the U.S. that could do anything at all about this? And the answer, of course, obviously, is no, unless you mean some faction within the Democratic Party. But and even then, it's not clear that right now they could do much about it. But that's something I wanted to talk about actually in this stream overall, was what should the remnants of the socialist left be doing as this war continues on into its second week, and as it looks like it will be more disruptive than the Trump administration had hoped. What should the response be? And let me tell you a few of the things that I've seen. It seems to me that people are relitigating Gaza through this moment, many people are hoping for the United States to be defeated by Iran in some way or another. It's unclear just what. There's a return to Mearsheimer and Jeffrey Sachs, that they're stepping forward as sort of mainstream left voices right now. And there's a call for conscientious objectors within the United States to do the right thing and refuse to provoke, to participate in war activity. That last one is a little confusing to me because there's no draft, and in my understanding of how you get a conscientious objector status is that it's not that you can say I object to this war for these reasons, but rather you have to be able to claim some sort of religious or ideological principle that keeps you from participating in war. Like if you're a Jehovah's Witness, you could be a conscientious objector. But am I defining that status too narrowly?
Yeah, maybe people who are saying that just want to see orders not followed.
Mm-hmm.
But the U.S. military has for a long time been constructed in such a way that it's quite difficult to get that to happen. You have no draft since Nixon got rid of it. And then you also are pulling from parts of the population where joining the military is a significant economic opportunity relative to what else is available.
Mm-hmm.
And to people who have a commitment to the United States as a project to the point at which they're willing to volunteer.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not exactly likely to have a lot of people who would have something like that sort of view in the U.S. military. And then not only is there no draft, but there is no ground deployment of large numbers of U.S. troops.
Right.
And a lot of what we're talking about is not even fighter jets. It's missiles. It's stuff that you do from a base by pushing buttons. It's not even, and the fighter jets, the fighter pilots aren't really at any kind of risk. The people who have been killed often not on a U.S. military base, but while they've been outside off doing something else and have been hit by something while they've been away from the military base. That seems to be the most common way U.S. troops are dying.
There were a couple of planes that got shot down, but they got shot down by Allied forces under friendly fire. Something like that's what I.
Yeah, we're really talking about freak accidents from the point of view of the policy, not something that can predictably happen in large numbers, which is why we're only talking about, I think it's 7 right now.
Yeah.
So it's not something which poses an extraordinarily serious danger to U.S. troops of the kind that they've not been experiencing. And many of the troops that are stationed in the Middle East have been living with and have previously been through rounds of True Promise, is the name of the Iranian operation where they throw the large number of missiles and drones at U.S. military bases and at Israel. There have been many rounds of it. I think that we're on the 4th one now. And so many of these people have lived under the shadow of that threat or with a certain amount of that going on for quite a long time. They're not the kinds of people who are going to mutiny against the government of the United States. It's not realistic. These people don't have a sense of what is the consciousness on those military bases.
Yeah. I want to throw this up on the screen real quick. Another comment. Someone says, avoid prospective draft by reciting Alice's Restaurant in full at the interview, and that will mean you're going to be rejected on age. So I like that. Yeah, but it does seem to me that the left is still stuck in the Vietnam era. People who weren't around, not only weren't around in the Vietnam era, they weren't even, around in the Gulf War.
If it ends, it's going to end because the oil prices will exact enough economic cost that capital wants it to end so as to stop having to pay the economic cost. It will not involve the left if it ends on the basis of the consequences of the attack and it going awry.
As I said at the beginning of this, I tweeted this the other day. It says, who are the big peaceniks today? The answer will surprise you. And the answer is stockholders and billionaires and the people who care about, the short-term asset values and things like that. Right. But that's
people who own oil assets in Bahrain and the UAE. Those are people who want it to end quickly because they're not making any money right now. People who own hotels in Dubai, they want it to end quickly because they're not making any money right now.
Right.
That's where the meaningful opposition is most likely to come from.
Right. And that's right. And that's already, there's already pressure from those sectors on the Trump administration.
And those allied states, they went and bought all of these weapons from American defense contractors to shoot down Iranian missiles. And now, because this has happened, all of this stuff has been shot at them. They're going through their stockpiles. And now the expectation is that they will buy even more ammunition from American defense contractors so that they can continue to do this. So there's also a sense in which the Gulf states who weren't consulted about this attack and didn't sign off on it have been kind of tricked because they bought a bunch of weapons to defend against Iran. The Americans provoked the Iranians to throw a bunch of missiles at them. They've depleted their stockpile, and now they have to go buy more weapons from who else? The Americans again. So they're very cross about this because they weren't treated as partner states from the point of view of making this decision. Israel was part of it, but they were not treated as partner states. And now they're expected to make an offensive contribution. Lindsey Graham this morning tweeted very angrily at Saudi Arabia for not making an offensive contribution. And the tweet was quite pointed, suggesting there would be consequences for Saudi Arabia if Saudi Arabia doesn't make a positive contribution.
Why would they want
Graham
that?
was threatening Saudi Arabia.
I don't see how that makes a lot of sense from the U.S. perspective.
Oh, it does. Because we have been selling a lot of our weapons to these Gulf states. So a lot of the weapons that we've made, we put in the hands of the Gulf states. And now the Gulf states hold the trigger for those weapons.
Yeah,
so
I
these
understand
weapons
that,
that we made, but they've got the trigger and they won't pull the trigger.
Yeah, but expanding the war to these Gulf states and including them in combat, it won't necessarily really speed up the end. It won't do so much more damage than is being done already, that it will be consequential.
But if they use those weapons, they have to buy more from us.
No, look, I understand
with their
that.
money.
No, I get that, but there are other factors. Is all I'm saying. And if you want this to be a quick operation, the risk of including these other players is that the war expands in ways which you can't control.
From their point of view, they're already included. From the point of view of Lindsey Graham, those states are already included because they're already being struck by the Iranians.
Right. Yeah. Okay. But there's
been talk about, also could you potentially get other population groups that are near the territory of Iran to potentially participate? So when people do talk about ground troops, if it were to go to the level of ground troops, what would that look like? It would probably look like there was some talk about the Kurds, although that ultimately proved to be unserious, but also the Azeris, because there's 20 million Iranians who are Azeri, and Azerbaijan has already demonstrated a capacity and willingness to try to take territory from neighboring states in opportunistic situations where it's able to do that because somebody's not at home or somebody is distracted. When they took a bunch of territory from the Armenians, they were able to do this in part because the Russian military was tied down in Ukraine and was therefore unable or unwilling to back the Armenians up. And so the Turks, in combination with the Azeris, were able to take a lot of territory from Armenia and greatly weaken it.
So Strom McCollum says, the story not being discussed here, fertilizer. If the strait remains closed, Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh could face a food crisis. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
that happened during the Ukraine war as well, because there was a lot of grain produced in Ukraine that was disrupted by that invasion. There was a lot of fuel price related increase to grain supplies. So that's something that happened before. There was a significant increase in food related deaths in Sri Lanka during that conflict. That stuff is not taken seriously by decision makers. They just allow that stuff to happen.
Yeah. So let's go back in time. Actually, let's see. Someone Strom says that could lead to an exodus ending with Greek Nazis in Thrace. It's a horrifying possibility. But okay, I wanted to say, like, if we think about the invasion of Iraq, in comparison to today, for me, the distinction is, there are lots of distinctions there, lots of differences, but with the war in Iraq, there was a year-long process of building up to the invasion, and there was a coherent, if not effective, left protest movement that was born out of that escalation towards invasion. Today, we have a left that, like the complaint at the time of the invasion of Iraq was that too many of the protest movement organizers were soft on Saddam Hussein and the Ba'athis, and that there was a problem with including Iraqis in the peace movement because the Iraqis were largely for the invasion and the attack. But today, that seems to be even more profoundly the case, that there's the only real response from the left has been to sort of either directly or indirectly embrace Iran and the mullahs. It doesn't seem to me that, and I think the real reason for that is that we don't have any clear idea as to what the left wants in this moment.
Well, that's where I think, what could the left do? The left needs to formulate a view of what kind of world it wants, where stuff like this doesn't happen, and then what would be necessary to build towards such a world. What would be the a plausible sequence of events that could take place such that you could achieve a world in which things like this don't occur?
Mm-hmm.
And the left is not able to do that, in part because the kinds of worlds in which this wouldn't happen, stuff like this wouldn't happen. I mean, there are worlds where this specific thing might not happen, but
Right.
stuff like this, it requires so much to change that it can be very depressing to take seriously all of the things that would need to change, and then to try to put them in some sort of order. So to say, okay, which things can we do first? What's a sequence which will get us to the bigger things in due course? This requires hard thinking. And part of the trouble is that the left is really inundated with terrible images and horrible stories and emergency conditions, which are epistemically degrading, which erode intellectual virtues that are necessary to think seriously about a problem and try to make some kind of progress on it in an organized way together with other people over a significant unit of time. There's this demand for an immediate response, which is effective, when no one is organized in such a way that there could be an effective response with any immediacy. Nobody has done anything that would construct such a thing, that could do anything that would have an impact here. And in the case of Iraq, it was kind of given to you a little bit, because when you have a large-scale U.S. troop deployment, you have immediately the families of these troops who are deeply concerned about them. You know, people who are not just going to be in fighter planes flying, with stealth, protection up in the sky, but people who are going to be on the ground, who can be blown up by improvised explosive devices, who are in serious danger of being killed in all kinds of accidental ways that the U.S. military just treats as, well, there's some statistical probability of that. What can you do? That created a substantial constituency, even though it was volunteers. When those people volunteered, they didn't expect to be deployed to a Middle Eastern country for an indefinite period of time. So you had people who had joined the military with different expectations from what they ultimately got. You had their families who were extremely concerned about them. And on the basis of that, you could, in society, make some kind of attempt to dialogue with those people and mobilize them in some form or fashion. But ultimately, what was the functioning of all of that mobilization? The functioning of it was to defeat the Republicans at the midterm election of 2006, after which the Democrats did not stop the surge from happening.
Well, you forget 2004. The real,
they failed to beat Bush in 2004.
Right. But that didn't even happen. When I was involved in the peace movement, the secret was, what we really wanted was to defeat him in Bush in 2000.
Yeah, to get rid of Bush. That didn't happen. You could point to 2006 as the substantial achievement of the peace movement, the Democratic Party victory in the 2006 midterms, Obama coming in. And then what does Obama do? Obama learns the lesson that you don't deploy ground troops and continues to do interventions without deploying ground troops. These interventions, the left has no capacity to meaningfully oppose, because they no longer involve the families of people who are being deployed in large numbers. And so this has broken the whole model for how do you oppose a war. And all the left can really do is want the war to conform to its model of a war that it can oppose, want the war to involve a deployment of US troops or to involve a draft, so that there's a logic that it follows that the left can interface with. But the left is in this case being conservative and retrograde in demanding that this war conform to historical examples so that it look like something that it knows how to interpret. When really what needs to be done is hard thinking about this is a different kind of situation. And Libya was of this type. What they did in Syria was of this type. And to a significant degree, Ukraine is also of this type, where you have the United States having a quite major, significant war with major consequences on the ground for a country without a troop deployment, and saying, they can't do it with air power, therefore there has to be a deployment. That's not true. We've seen them do a lot of things without a large-scale deployment over the last 15 years. We've been seeing more and more and more of this for the last 30 years. There is an established pattern of using ground troops less, and if you do use ground troops, using somebody else's ground troops. That principle of Vietnamization that Nixon articulated in the 70s has only become more and more over time a cornerstone of the U.S. intervention strategy. And Iraq, therefore, looks like an exception relative to the vast bulk of interventions that have taken place since Vietnam, which have involved somebody else's ground troops or no ground troops at all.
Yeah. Strom says, What do anti-Semitism, the Islamic Republic, the Israeli state, and the Third Temple heresy all have in common? They suck. It's not a question. It's just a comment. And then someone asks, so does Trump betray his constituency, which wanted to end forever wars? And I'm going to say he hasn't yet. I mean, there are plenty of people who were MAGA Republicans who are upset. Tucker Carlson, of course, is amongst those who's the most visible. I haven't really listened to him, but I know he's upset. But it remains to be seen as to whether or not we're going to have to deploy any kind of ground troops and to what extent this will turn into a forever war. And it could, the other thing is, I think it could be something like a forever war. In other words, we could have a situation where, let's say, the Israeli Air Force just continually dominates Iranian airspace and occasionally mows the lawn, as they say, in Iran to blow up drone facilities, nuclear facilities, missiles and launchers and all that, and occasionally kills civilians, of course, without it being a forever war in the minds of the American public. Without it, that kind of liability arising. So, but one thing that we talked about at the beginning, I want to bring up again now, is that it does seem to me that securing the strait and normalizing the region in terms of trade, will be difficult for weeks, possibly months, possibly years to come. We don't know. And that will be consequential.
Before they can secure the strait, they have to eliminate the Iranian Navy and the Iranian capacity to lob missiles at ships in the strait. And that's going to take a period of time for them to do that.
Not just missiles, but drones. And drones are really these kamikaze drones.
Yeah. They're easy to make. Now, they're getting better at defending all of this stuff. But right now, if they try to drive a bunch of ships in there, they're going to have to expend too much to defend those ships. And from a cost-benefit analysis, it doesn't make sense for them.
They can't use mere threats of retaliation to stop attacks. This is, the bombing is happening.
Because they're already doing it, right? There's nothing that they credibly could promise not to do or to do to try to influence Iranian behavior if they were to try to go into the strait. Now, I think that a major part of this will be, can they open up enough other things? Are there other ways to get oil and gas into the ecosystem here such that they aren't so heavily affected by Hormuz? And is there some desire, maybe, if it affects Chinese manufacturing disproportionately, is this a way of trying to tariff the Chinese effectively by imposing a heavier cost on the Chinese?
Yeah. And well, the other thing that to keep in mind is that Strait of Hormuz is relied upon by the Iranians as well. Like they need to have that open for their own internal development, sustainability. They rely on exports of oil and natural gas.
Yes, so it gets dangerous if you go down the road of trying to really economically disable the country. Even Lindsey Graham is concerned about what happens if you do that.
Right.
So I don't think they're trying to bring the Iranian.
No, I'm just saying the Iranians may be motivated to find a way to open up the strait themselves, rather than
if this goes on at a level where the Iranians themselves believe that they can tolerate it. The issue is that the leaders are personally being endangered, so the leaders can't possibly open up the strait while they're being personally targeted.
Right.
Doesn't make sense for them to do that. They can't anticipate being able to use any economic benefits they get from opening up the strait. It just takes away their leverage. So I think the strait is likely to remain closed for a while, and that this is the principal way in which it will go horribly wrong, if it does go horribly wrong, for the United States. Rising oil prices, if the United States isn't able to offset them for a long enough period of time, will cause political consequences that the Trump administration ultimately can't bear. There will be a midterm defeat, and that will be the mechanism by which this is really quite seriously brought to an end.
If the current president had managed to take control or get that authority rather than this new Ayatollah, the war would be closer to an end at this point. Don't you think?
Well, I don't know that. I think that he was trying to get the Gulf states to not intervene. And there's a question about what the Gulf states will do. Because if the Gulf states aren't able to make money either, for a while, the Gulf states will look for a peaceful resolution to happen, for the Americans and the Israelis to get tired of paying the cost and to back off. But if the Gulf states come to the view that they're only going to be able to get the strait back open again if they participate, and that might also be one of the mechanisms here. It might be that the United States doesn't open the strait until the Gulf states get involved as a way of dragging them and their ammo stockpiles into it. But can you bear the cost of trying to do that at home? Here, it really, you must imagine that when they decided to do this, they knew that the Iranians would close the strait. They knew that that would happen. The war plan, because we know that the Pentagon has war plans for different countries where it imagines, okay, if a war is being fought between the United States and this country, what's the likely sequence of events? And they have very worked out game theoretical war plans that are not public knowledge, that we don't have access to. The war plan for Iran must have involved, they'll close the Strait of Hormuz, and then what will the United States do in response to that? So people who are acting like the Americans must be surprised that the Strait of Hormuz isn't open. That can't possibly be right. There's no way that the Pentagon war plan is that insipid.
No, I agree. And Trump has an escort proposal that he's floated but hasn't acted on. But again, all of this is it. I just think that it will be very difficult to create conditions where these tankers can safely pass through the strait, even with an escort, because these drones, are very difficult to defend against, and
it's not worth it. You end up wasting a lot of your ammo on protecting ships, and you're not going to get that many through, and the shipping companies aren't going to want to do it.
Right.
I don't think that's going to happen. I think that we will probably see the strait closed for a while yet. And what they'll try to do is they'll try to get the new Ayatollah and try to do another round of leader targeting and see if they can open up another vacuum and then see what happens. I think that they'll try to do that again.
It's going to be harder to hit this Ayatollah, I think.
I don't know what their quality of their intelligence is. They killed many members of this Ayatollah's family already. So I don't know what the quality of the intelligence is, but it would seem to me that that would be the logic of their position, that they would target the new Ayatollah and try to continue the decapitation strategy.
Meanwhile, all we can really do is what we've been doing, talking about it all as if it's a game of Risk or a video game we're watching, or a movie, and just sit and watch, see what happens next. But I do think it's worthwhile to notice that what you said, a couple of the major things you said. One is that the ground troops are not necessary, that we don't need to wish for them to be deployed in order to think through a response. If we're on the left and we're socialists, there's no reason to hope for that. And we should accept a real predicament in this moment, which is that we do not have the base or the ability to respond in any meaningful way at the moment. And that those of us, and I would add, those who call upon us to respond, like when Elizabeth Warren leaves a war planning meeting and says, Trump doesn't have a plan, this is insane, this is just completely dangerous and out of control, we've got to do something about this. We should recognize that what she's doing is trying to undermine the Republicans, make him look incompetent, and rally up the base for votes for Democrats who, when they inherit the situation, will continue on the same basis. That there's no, this is not
a good cop, bad cop strategy where sometimes a Republican creates a mess for a Democrat to inherit, and sometimes a Democrat creates a mess for a Republican to inherit in the case of the Ukraine war.
Right. Exactly. But but we're not looking at a political situation where there is any serious opposition to there. All there are some tactical disagreements. And that was the case with Obama, who ran as a peace candidate.
Part of the trouble here is that so much of the left is committed to a world of nation states. and thinks that it's possible for nation states to just coexist peacefully and not have these kinds of problems.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's just a moral failure on the part of certain leaders of certain states that conflicts happen.
Right.
And when people have that kind of naive attitude, they're not going to get serious about a world in which we don't have these kinds of conflicts, where we don't have a bunch of nation states in security competition, in commercial competition with each other, with only very flimsy international institutions to try to rein that in.
Yeah. I mean, I think what would be best is for people who are currently calling themselves leftists or socialists, who don't want to face the difficulties and how they don't want to face how improbable real solutions are, for them to just accept that they are not socialists or leftists, and that they instead have adjusted to the world as it is and are just trying to manage it. And that's fine. I mean, that's a perfectly defensible thing to do. And people like you and I, Ben, we don't have as an easy time defending what we want to do. We
don't have something to immediately propose.
Right. No, but I mean, look, I just remember early days in my leftism when I would go to like info shops and read about the possibility of a socialist society where we wouldn't have to face the brutality of the police. Right. And then I get these books about, well, how could we actually live in a society without the cops? And then, it became, these debates would rage, and it was really difficult. But it was hard to even conceive. Right. Yeah. And so that's the difficulty we're facing, is we're those guys.
3 post-colonial states with a bunch of smaller states that have been created as buffer states by the former colonizers in between them.
Mm-hmm.
And they're competing for spheres of influence and power in all of these buffer states.
Right.
You have a pressure cooker environment where interstate competition is what drives a lot of the activity that takes place. And look at what happened in Libya. It became a proxy war for Turkey and Egypt.
Right.
That's what it became. And it's the fact that Turkey and Egypt are separate nation states that is causing the Libyan civil war to continue. Yes, the United States intervened to get rid of Gaddafi, but once that happened and a power vacuum was created and the Westerners left and assumed that the Libyans would figure out what would happen, what happened is that Egypt and Turkey got involved, and it turned into a competition zone for Egypt and Turkey.
Right.
And it doesn't require Westerners. It's just having multiple different distinct centers of power. The nation state system is the problem. It's not Westerners. It's not the Europeans. It's the nation state system.
Right. And the way I would put it is capital is a problem. But yeah, it is a nation state system. And
those things are interlinked.
Yeah, it's all the same. Yeah. But right. And that makes it incredibly difficult to try to untangle, because, we're very used to having bad guys and good guys to, support or oppose.
Yeah.
And
it can only be bad guys and good guys if you're taking nation state sides, if you're picking nation states to root for or against. And if you do that, you're just going to have a world where there's continuous competition among nation states, and that's going to be commercial and military competition. And every time you say, hey, how about a different kind of world where we don't have to compete so hard commercially or militarily with each other, where we can cooperate, people will say, well, if you try to act like that, then we're going to have a competitive disadvantage, and then we're going to get beaten by these people from this other nation state.
There was a time when if you asked, which side are you on, everyone knew you were asking, are you on the side of the working class or the bosses? But now you ask, which side are you on? It's like, are you on the side of China, the United States?
It's flags in the profile. And then it's all the Venn diagrams about what kind of person you are based on which combination of flags.
Right. Well,
it's not socialism. It's nationalism.
No. Yep. Listen, let's end this stream here. We'll talk about what's happening in Germany and the new push for intensifying productivity around the globe, probably, but in Germany particularly. And go join us in the Parrot Room. I'll start up in about 10 minutes, and thanks everyone for watching. Oh, wait, I'm going to change the outro to be the same as the intro before I do that. All right, here we go. I'm going to end the stream now.
In the case of nuclear or radiological fallout, people living around potential targets such as military bases and chemical plants may be advised to evacuate.